Welcome to the podcast Education Reinvented. I'm your host Emily and I'm a student at Deakin, studying in a unit called Education, Knowledge and Society, which is probably the reason why you're listening to this right now. In today's episode, I am discussing how high school education has failed us. To start with, there are two types of education. There's traditional, meaning students are taught through a learning process of memorization of texts. This type of education consists of the educator teaching past established knowledge and principles and expecting obedience and apprehension from their students. Then there's progressive education, which is a more collaborative learning experience. This method of learning is accepting of a changing world and allows students to reflect on their experiences and attain fundamental skills as a way of learning. This consists of the educator allowing mistakes and inquiries into the education system and expecting critical thought and mutual respect. These two ways of teaching are almost complete opposites. The only similarity they share is that they understand that teachers are a vital part to a child's education, as they are experience mediator between knowledge and the student. As the lecture from week 3 describes, teachers are organizers of the environment and information passed through. It is known that teachers are vital parts of the classroom and building society. These two ways of learning are opposites from how knowledge is learnt to the ultimate goals they have. Dewey explains traditional education is a means of preparing young people for the adult world, where they would act by other people around them, whereas progressive is a means of developing young people in their present opportunities, so that they may improve society in the future. Progressive is characterized by learning skills as a means of having qualifications, whereas traditional education learns singular irrelevant skills by drill. In the modern day, schools and teachers might try to use progressive approach by trying to take advantage of present opportunities, but the curriculum restricts them otherwise. As Dewey explains, there is a large gap between adult experience and young abilities, so participation from pupils is not encouraged. Even with teachers aware of this gap, they might be resorting to using art to cover up the daunting work. It was only last year I was memorizing textbooks and long PowerPoints, and teachers would try to cover up the amount of redundant work by giving us summarized text or teaching to the test. In the end, I never remembered that information to the same extent after the test was done. This traditional way of learning is obviously not adhering to all students and how they might learn effectively. Schools attempt to prepare us for university, our careers, and adult life, but most of the tests and assignments I took in year 11 and 12, I would likely fail if I took them now. The most prominent skill I've retained is procrastinating my way through assignments and doing them at last minute, meaning I was not able to fully engage in my learning. My experience of education so far has made me aware of the flaws that the education system holds. By use of traditional education as a learning tool, it focused on short-felt successes and irrelevant principles. Catherine Devaney criticizes the Year 12 system, showing the same idea, that the education system is unfair and doesn't focus on the student's experience and present opportunities. Instead, it focused on ATAR results and assignment grades, punishing or disregarding those who do not receive the expected results. Noddings agrees that traditional expectations disregard non-high achievers and suggests an education that identifies their talents and interests and can teach based on a student's individual abilities. The curriculum that based itself on old principles is deemed redundant as the system fails to educate children based on their natural equipment. The attempt to educate children as a cohort by minimizing the natural differences, once reserved for a few, deems the technique futile. Referring to the lecture in week 2 of Education, Knowledge and Society, critical pedagogy is mentioned as a question about the aims of progressive and traditional education. Critical pedagogy or critical teaching means that an educator will not teach to a test and does not focus on objectives. Instead, the teacher focuses on the student's experience and can speak about social issues, not focusing on already determined content. This pedagogy suggests that progressive teaching is an effective tool, more so than traditional, as it aims for its students to become critical thinkers who can also improve society and make their place in the world. Traditional education differs from progressive education in several important ways. Traditional trains people to become obedient, to follow, and never lead. An example of this learning technique can be different ethics in the workplace. Some value loyalty to a company and remain hard-working for many years, regardless of whether the environment is toxic or one might get a high position elsewhere. It can be considered a way of thinking that adults have tried to instill in the younger generations. This thinking promotes a society that never changes and stays loyal to its ways of functioning, even with flaws. Knowledge is understood in a very straightforward way, and its educators try to instill in its students that they must never question it. Piper agrees that those following traditional education means that pupils have no care to see society transformed and continue following old principles. Progressive education trains people to value experience and knowledge to better society and lead. They also work hard, but they value experience and qualities. Some might move jobs after a couple of years if their current position does not improve or to better their qualifications and pay grade. Using this example, the employee can detect the company's flaws and make changes by moving jobs. In this example, you can see that this learning technique promotes a society that can attend to its flaws and continue to better itself. The people these students are becoming can critically examine the flaws in society, free themselves from old traditions, and make decisions of their own. An important component of progressive education is allowing questions and criticism from teachers and students. I am including sources from Ira Shaw, who published Education is Politics, and Paul Godin, who wrote Traditional or Progressive Education, Either or. I believe they have published perspectives that perfectly encapsulate what is important in progressive education. Teachers and educators are willing to let their pupils experience, make mistakes, and engage in their education. Dewey mentions criticism towards progressive education as some experiences are miseducative, but Ira encourages students to question their experiences and arouse their curiosity, as it could be a critical learning experience. Godin also follows Ira's ideas as he believes that it is a way for a learner to evaluate and react to the experience, which influences other experiences. In a way, Godin and Ira both argue that pupils should reflect upon their experiences and lean into their curiosities so that they can learn from them and not be taught through memorization. The ultimate aim of progressive education is that society be built by educated people who can make decisions freely based on criticism of past fundamentals. The people who make society will know their place and be able to use the accumulation of experiences to create better experiences for others. An important component of traditional education is strict one-way authority that teachers have. The authority demands obedience and respect, which restricts a student's curiosity and engagement in their learning. In today's world, the main aim of traditional education seems to be always economic, and remains to focus on the adult world and its standards. Instead of school being a part of the child's present life, it is presented as a means towards the adult life, and conforming to that static way of life. By using the authority of teachers and educators, they demand pupils to assume roles as economic functionaries. Piper describes the traditional format in education as a recreation of the hierarchical status quo, and urges schools to be more than mere reproductions of past ineffective teaching methods, and to instill a critical consciousness. Stifling a child's creativity and curiosity is what has failed high school students today, and is what has failed me. I was not allowed, like many others, to showcase other skills that might display our competence. Instead, high school expectations were unfairly placed and only left many wishing that the education system would be different. And so progressive education would be a more equitable and effective learning practice for me and other students in Victoria. That's all for today's podcast. A special thanks to myself for production and editing. I'm your host, Emily, and thank you for listening.